Hey everybody, we just finished the Call of the Netherdeep campaign and I wanted to provide my overall thoughts as well as give some advice. So let's dig in. The first thing I want to start out with is just giving out my overall tips so that if you're here, we just get the best tips over with first, and then you can cut out later if you want. I'm going to go over the DM tips and tricks I have for the entire campaign, and then we're going to kind of go through chapter by chapter, and then I'll leave you with my final thoughts. As someone who has run the campaign and gone all the way through, the first thing that I think it's important to think about with this is the Call of the Netherdeep introduces this rival party, and it's kind of the thing that sets it apart from other adventures that have been published by Wizards of the Coast. I think first thing first is you need to make sure that your PCs are the heroes of the story. The book lays it out so that they can either get the Jewel of Three Prayers or they cannot get the Jewel of Three Prayers and kind of play chase with the rival party. My personal opinion is I feel like your players should be the heroes of the story and not the rivals. They shouldn't be chasing the rivals throughout. The biggest way I feel like to do this is at the very beginning of the book. In chapter 1, there's a festival, and at the end of the festival, there's a competition. It's a race that you're doing against the rival party, and at the very end, you're supposed to grab an item off of a shark and head back. The first party back wins the race and wins the competition. However, in the room with the shark, after you kill the shark, it's supposed to hit the wall, and there's supposed to be a cave-in. It leads to this room where the Jewel of Three Prayers can be found. And the Jewel of Three Prayers is a vestige of divergence that basically leads your players through the entire story in the campaign. Whoever has the Jewel of Three Prayers are the main characters of the story. The problem that you run into with this is when your party is going through this, they are so focused on the race and winning the race, they don't think about, hey, let's go into this cave-in area and explore something else and waste time. I think it's important to give them a reason to want to go in there. In my game, I gave my warlock a vision from her patron. You could do the same thing with a cleric or a paladin or really anything. Give them a reason to want to go in there. Another option is, if you don't want to do go the vision route, is to have the cave collapse all around them, and the only escape route is through the little chamber that opens up so that they can get up into where the Jewel of Three Prayers is found. They have the vision, and I think there's an opening in there, and if not there, you can make an opening in there and they can get out that way. I feel like it's super important for your party to get the jewel. With the rival party, it's a super interesting mechanic. It can be a little bit tricky for newer DMs to have to worry about role-playing 5 different NPCs fairly regularly and keeping their personalities consistent. I think it's important to be honest with yourself and realize how much you can and can't do, and then determine how much the rivals are going to be in your story. And you can always change it later on. Mine played a decent part in the story. You can start out having them show up a lot, and then maybe they get busy doing their own side quests and you see them only occasionally. But I made sure that they never traveled with my party and they never really battled with my party, with the exception of a couple of times, so that I didn't have to worry about running 5 NPCs, making sure my players were doing what they needed to, and then running any monsters that they were encountering as well. So just for simplicity's sake, I made sure that they were always busy doing a task, doing something else. They were chasing down Ruidium, or they were working with the Allegiance of Allside or something else. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do to make sure that runs smoothly for you. If you're up for the challenge, I think it's great, and it can be a lot of fun to have them there and around a lot. They can also throw a wrench in things sometimes, so that can be a little bit fun as well. But just think about it as you're running through. Make sure you're flexible as well, and know that it's okay to tell your party, nope, the rivals can't come at this point in time. I had to do that a few times as well. One time I can think of is my party asked the rivals to come with them into the Netherdeep. I didn't want to run everybody, so I just said, hey, sorry, the Allegiance has an important business for us. We're already in the... Basically, they already went in. Another thing is to be aware of all the free resources that are available. The biggest one for me is the Call of the Netherdeep subreddit. There is so much information there, and I feel like this is true of any of the published adventures. Go to the subreddit, find the subreddit. There's all kinds of materials. There's extra side quests. There's discussions about what's going on and what to change and what they have changed, what they think should change. And if you have a question about what you're doing and how your party has interacted and how things can go from there, it's a great place to get feedback. On top of all of that, there are also maps that people have made. Cat Valkyrie, huge shout out to Cat Valkyrie. There is a beautiful map for almost every encounter you can run from the book. Provide a link for both the subreddit and for Cat Valkyrie's maps in the description below. All of that being said, the place that I would start is the resource mega thread, and I'll provide a link for that in the description as well. It has a whole list of things that are helpful, from rival trackers, which I made one and didn't end up using, to all kinds of different encounters and things that you can use. So start there and explore. One of the critiques that I have seen on that subreddit specifically is giving the player with the Jewel of Three Prayers the main character kind of syndrome. There are a couple of ways I feel like you can avoid this. A lot of people have talked about making it so that you can only wear it for X number of days and then you've got to pass it on. So just kind of sharing the jewel between the party. I didn't end up having too much of an issue with our warlock having it, Iris. She had it the entire campaign and nobody else seemed to care all that much. But what I wish I would have done, and if I have to start over and run this again, what I think I will do is whenever they find the jewel and when the jewel levels up to its next state, which happens in the prayer site of Sihanine in the Emerald Grotto is when you find it, and then the prayer site of Avandra in the Betrayer's Rise, and then the Temple of the Archheart in Kael Morrow, I would give each PC a magical item and have them have a vision of how that deity has led them to this point in their lives. In Betrayer's Rise and in Kael Morrow, I ended up giving my PCs magical items. I think in Kael Morrow they all got rings, but I would have given them visions as well. Try not to overshadow the visions from the Apotheon, right? But I think that's what I would do if I were to run this again, is to give them visions leading them up here so that they're all involved and feel like, hey, we're headed in the right direction. Another thing that people have suggested and have done is giving each player their own vestige of divergence or their own arm of the betrayer, which come from the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. You can also find those on the subreddit. Those are some that the people have come up with. The last piece of big advice I have with this adventure is at the very end, when you're in the heart of despair, ready to face Alexian for the last time, the book has him ask the party if he is okay to leave, and if they say yes, you get the worst ending in the book. He goes out and he basically can destroy the entire city of Ank'Harel because he's not ready to be redeemed yet. I have seen horror stories, I guess, on the subreddit if you do this. So what I did is I didn't have him ask until after he had been defeated. His first two phases had been defeated. When they went to finally redeem him, you have to roll some persuasion checks, and if you roll well enough on the third success, he is redeemed. I had him ask then if they were okay with him, because they can truly judge him at this point if it was okay that he left. And then they said yes. And the reason for that is I feel like unless you roleplay Alexian really well in the Netherdeep and your players have a good understanding that his mind is not 100% in the right place and he's tormented and he's been tortured for all these years and he's just not in a good headspace, I feel like your party's just gonna be like, yeah, sure, see you later. And it's too easy to get the bad ending. That's why I changed it. So now let's dig into review chapter by chapter. Chapter 1, a fateful competition. Your party starts in Jigao, which is basically just like an amalgamation of coastal villages. In Jigao, you have a chance to show off your physical, social, and intellectual prowess in this Festival of Merit that is held by the Council of Elders in Jigao. And it's an annual festival. Everybody kind of gets together and they show one another up. Jigao is a very competitive place. Your party has the opportunity to come and participate in some of the events, and you can pay to get in or not. I ended up changing this a little bit for flavor's sake so that they were recruited by one of the elders to compete for the elders, and there's a competition between the elders, and whoever wins kind of gets bragging rights for the year. This is also the first opportunity your players have to have interactions with the rival party. So you have all these different events and they compete. The grand finale of the Festival of Merit is a race through the Emerald Grotto where your party is pitted against the rival party, and you go track down this amulet known as the Emerald Eye, and then return it to the elders. Whoever goes and brings it back first wins. In the Emerald Grotto, in this race, as we've talked about this already, is where you can find the Jewel of Three Prayers, which is basically the giant MacGuffin for the entire campaign. It's where you receive visions, and it can open up doors for you later on, and it's how you have a connection to Alexian the Apotheon. That's basically a brief overview of the chapter. Tips and advice I have for this, I talked about earlier. Just give them a huge reason to go and find the Jewel of Three Prayers. Other than that, there's an event in the festival where they're solving some riddles. My party didn't really like the first two riddles as they couldn't solve them themselves. They wanted to be able to solve them, so they really liked the third one. I had a visual aid for it. I highly recommend that. You can find that on the subreddit as well. They really did like that one though. I feel like you could replace the other two, or maybe just ignore the other two if you wanted, and no one would be the wiser. The other thing for this chapter is really get to know and understand the rival party, each member, and what their motivations are and their goals are. Otherwise, this chapter can be pretty much run as is. And again, huge reminder, give your party a reason to go find the Jewel of Three Prayers. It's too easy to be passed up. Chapter 2, the leave taking. Your party, basically, after they find the Jewel of Three Prayers, they can talk to one of the elders. I think it's Elder Ushru, who comes and talks to them and lets them know he had a vision and they should go find out more information about the vision that they have. So the way that they do that is they head from Jigao all the way to Bazzoxan, which is about I think it can take 9 to 15 days depending on the pace of your party. And this entire chapter is discussing how you get from Jigao all the way to Bazzoxan. The first leg of the journey, you're basically going through the wastes of Xhorhas from Jigao to the Emerald Loop caravan stop, which is about halfway, which is where you can run into a bunch of travelers. And then the second leg of the journey is from that caravan stop all the way to Bazzoxan, and this you're kind of in this valley that's known as the Barbed Fields. There's these giant rock spikes that are a result of the calamity, which is kind of cool, and then they end up in Bazzoxan. So that's pretty much the entire chapter. Tips and advice I have for this is just make sure you've got a good reason for your party to head to Bazzoxan. Luckily for me, my party was just like, yeah, this sounds great, let's go. But I could see where it would be problems like, why do we want to go here? Just make sure that they understand that getting more information about the vision that they had and the jewel that they have can be found in Bazzoxan in Betrayer's Rise. Another piece of advice I have for this is you don't have to roll for the encounters as your party is going. You can pre-roll, you can just pick which ones you like. I read through them all and rolled, and then there are some encounters like the Moorbounder Mayhem, where if you have the encounter, then when you get to the Emerald Loop Caravan Stop, there are some other interactions you can have with Justice. So any of them that were like that, I had happen before the Emerald Loop Caravan Stop, then we had the Caravan Stop, and then after I just had some more. And I rolled them all beforehand, you can do that as well. Or if you like the surprise, you can also just roll for them, but it's not necessary. Also, don't be afraid to add encounters of your own. As we were going through, at one point I could tell my party was kind of tired of like random encounters where they were fighting, or they were running into a group of Auroran Watch who was fighting, or things like that. So I switched things up and I had them run into a Harengon named Henry the Hare, and we had a more social interaction. He ended up being a thief who was trying to pickpocket them at night. So we changed things up a little bit rather than just like the battle, fight kind of thing. So don't be afraid to add things in on your own and improvise a little bit. Chapter 3, Bazzoxan. This city was set up ages ago when there's a rift in Betrayer's Rise that was opened, and creatures from the abyss come out and have been attacking the area in Jarhas. Whenever this happened, the city was set up basically for the Auroran Watch so that they could come and stop these incursions happening. And so it's under military law, martial law, and Tascan Varen Thalis is over the entire city. When you get to the city, you have an encounter with some gibbering mouthers that have escaped from the Betrayer's Rise. So you have that, you can fight them or you run away, and then from there it's pretty much a sandbox that you can run. There's a bunch of different areas and locations that they can interact with. And the other thing is Betrayer's Rise, which is the big reason for your party wanting to come here, and where they have another opportunity to receive a vision about Elixion. Tips and advice for this chapter. The book doesn't provide a lot to stop the party from just heading straight to Betrayer's Rise when they are underleveled for the dungeon. It's a pretty intense dungeon. There's a lot of things, not just monsters that they encounter, but other effects that they can run into as well that can hinder them a little bit. So what I did is I had Tascan Thalis instruct the guards, the Auroran Watch guards at the entrance of Betrayer's Rise, that the only people who could enter Betrayer's Rise were those that had express written permission from Tascan Thalis to get in. Otherwise, they just turn you around. And in order to get permission, they had to kind of mill about the city and kind of prove that they weren't just going to get stomped on inside there. Also, Tascan Thalis made sure to let them know we've had lots of people die, come back crazy, all kinds of things, so you're warned. This city doesn't have a whole lot for your party to get leveled up. So there are a whole bunch of encounters that are on the subreddit. One that I ran is called the Hythanis Estate, which was created by Cat Valkyrie again. I'll provide a link for that in the description below. But there are other encounters as well in the subreddit that you can add, or you can just make up your own as well. When you get to Betrayer's Rise, there's some Gloomstalkers that come out, and after you fight the Gloomstalkers, you're supposed to level up. So in order to justify that more, you can have more interactions and more encounters in Bazzoxan itself. The other thing that I highly recommend here is get a connection to one of the factions from Ank'Harel. So there's Aloysia or Question who have ties to Ank'Harel and the factions there, the Allegiance of Allsight and the Library of the Cobalt Soul. I think it's important so that they have something tied to once they get to Ank'Harel. And then other than that, just have a lot of fun when you get into Betrayer's Eyes. It's a lot of fun in there. Chapter 4, The Jewel of Hope. This is a huge, wide open metropolis that is a giant sandbox for your party to explore. So it's kind of different from the trek from Jigao all the way to Bazzoxan, where it's just very linear. And then Bazzoxan's a little bit open. This really opens up. Lots of places to visit. Eventually your party should, however, start working with one of the three factions. The three factions in the main story anyway are the Allegiance of Allsight, the Consortium of the Vermilion Dream, and the Library of the Cobalt Soul. So it's important to kind of get a feel for them and what their goals are, and kind of show those to your players so that they go and work for whichever faction they feel like fits best. Inside of Ank'Harel, with your faction, there are 6 missions that the factions ask you to complete, which end up getting you into Kael'Maro and then eventually into the Netherdeep. What I recommend is as soon as they get there, give them the Ank'Harel City Guide that was made by Bonghard on Reddit. Provide a link for that in the description below. It's basically just a pamphlet that you can give your party. You can print it out or you can just hand it to them digitally. I did digitally. It's got a bunch of points of interest and things like that. And then also let your party know that, hey, there's going to be some downtime here. Let me know what you want to do. Think about it. Another piece of advice here is whichever faction your party joins, have the rival party join a different faction. If they're friendly, have them join a friendly faction. If they're unfriendly, have have them join a faction that's not friendly, and then have them running the missions as your party is. So if your party's on the Cobalt Soul mission 3, the rivals could be on the Allegiance mission 3, so that they know about what the party would know had they been in that same faction. And then when you have interactions with the rival party, you can share information. Otherwise, I would say just get to know the city and don't be afraid to make things up and veer from what is actually in the book. So I had added a tournament, a fighting tournament in there. There's a whole bunch of things. There's like casinos and all kinds of fun stuff that you can add into your game if you'd like. Lots of downtime can be found here. Chapter 5, the Drowned City. So one of your faction missions is going to lead you into this, and this area is found through an excavation site that is blocked off by the Allegiance of All Sight, and going through the faction missions will provide you a way to get down here. The entire city is underwater and way underground. The Allegiance of All Sight has been doing research, and portions of this city have been reclaimed by the Allegiance, and they've set some magical wards so that there's parts of it that aren't actually underwater. Also, another thing to note is the area Corrupted Aboleth down here that thinks it's Elixian and protects the rift pretty much at all costs. There's lots of fun things to explore down here. There are some creatures that are not in any other adventures that are unique to this setting that have been corrupted by ruidium. So there's a lot of interesting things for your party to run into that they have not run into before. Tips and advice: just have a basic understanding of what is where and what interactions happen where in the city. It's not super big compared to Ank'Harel. There are just kind of have an understanding of how things work, especially like the keystones that hold the water back, those kinds of things. I would also have an idea of when and where you want to have the rival party interact with your party. In my game, my party was very friendly with the rivals. My party joined the Library of the Cobalt Soul, so the rivals joined the Allegiance of All Sight. And about this time, as my party's headed in, they're tasked with finding a spy who's Galio Kirda inside of the Kael Maro. So my party was exploring, looking around for various things to gain the trust of Insight, and they ran into the rival party as the rivals were trying to capture Galio Kirda, and Irvin lost his arm in that battle. So my party helped subdue Galio Kirda and her guardian, and they were able to help bring her back and got some brownie points from the Allegiance and the Library of the Cobalt Soul. So just kind of have an understanding of that, where you think it would be interesting for your party to meet up with the rivals. If they're not friendly, where would be a good place to have a good battle, make things a little bit more interesting. The other thing is there's a key to the rift, Really any ruidium item will open the rift. I gave my party a reason to go find the key. That's Great Axe, I think it is. Yeah, that's lodged into the dome of a Death Embrace, which is basically a giant jellyfish. So the consortium was using that area as a base of operations. But otherwise, I think the chapter can be pretty much run as is. There's some interesting treasure that can be found there. So there's some interesting NPC interactions that can be had there. It's a lot of fun. Chapter 6, the Netherdeep. So the Netherdeep is an underwater dungeon at the bottom of a lightless abyss. It's really important that your party has a ruidium item so that they don't suffer from the compression and pressure, as well as a way to breathe underwater, and I think the ruidium item covers that as well. In the Netherdeep, this is where you really truly understand who Elixian is, what his life was about, and where his head is at right now, because this entire plane of existence, so to speak, was created by Elixian, his torment. Inside the Netherdeep, there are 3 different regions. The first is the Grotto of Regret. Here you experience living memories of the Apotheon's past. It's shaped by his sorrows of an unfulfilled life. The second area is the Vents of Fury. This area is filled with violent creatures and shards of the Apotheon's persona. The region is dimly lit by fiery vents that belch the Apotheon's wrath. A little bit of a change here. In the Grottos of Regret, Elixian is really willing to work with the party and talk to the party. In the Vents of the Fury, he's just angry. And then there we have the Chasms of Yearning, and this is really, this area, the architecture, the creatures, is really just trying to disorient the players. There's twisting corridors that are just basically trying to represent the Apotheon's desire for freedom. And at the very center of it all is the Heart of Despair. So inside of the Netherdeep, there are fragments of suffering that your party is trying to collect. Every character needs a fragment in order to pass through into the Heart of Despair. Advice I have for this one is just really lean into role-playing Elixian. Make sure that you understand where his frame of mind is in each section and that you can convey that to your party, and make sure that your characters understand that he is not of sound mind. And this is another area to know if and when your party is going to run into the rivals, if they're friendly and if they're not, and how that's going to change. My party found Dermot, who was petrified by one of the Death Embraces down here, and they were friendly, so they carried Dermot around until they got into the Heart of Despair. They only had a couple of fragments. The rival party had taken off back to Ank'Harel to get a way to revive Dermot, and they came back and were searching everywhere for him, and eventually ran into my party at the Heart of Despair and gave my party the fragments they needed to get into the Heart of Despair. Also, throughout this, there are notes in the book saying if you do XYZ, your party has a an advantage in the final fight. Keep track of all of those, because when you go into the final fight, there are some persuasion checks your party can make to help Alexian feel like he's worth redeeming, and if they have done those things, they get advantage on that many number of checks. So just keep track of that as you're going through. This is a fantastic dungeon, in my opinion. It's unique, it's interesting. There's not one way through it. There's lots of different ways you can get in and around, and there are lots of unique experiences that your party can have. And I know that my party specifically really praised this, so hats off to the writers for this one. Chapter 7, The Heart of Despair, the final chapter in the book. The Heart of Despair is basically a prison that Alexian has made for himself. He's trapped here and will only leave if he is given permission by someone who can truly judge him. So inside of here, there are basically 3 stages to the fight with Alexian. The first is with a tormented version of Alexian. He's this giant sluggy creature with spears and spikes and stuff. He's very angry in this version. Phase 2 is a very arrogant, kind of celestially looking version of Alexian. And then the third version is he's kind of this old man where he's very despondent and doesn't seem to think that he is worth redeeming. So again, really good opportunities for you to roleplay with your party as you are fighting. This fight can be a lot of fun to interact and not just be a punching match. There's a lot of opportunity to roleplay here, and there's some suggested dialogue in the book that can help you with that as well. With all of that, you can either defeat Alexian or you can redeem him, or, as I mentioned earlier on, there's potential to let him loose early, and you let loose this monster that can destroy the entirety of Ank'Harel as well as Exandria. So the best piece of advice I can give, I already gave earlier on, is that just don't let Alexian ask the party right off if it's okay for him to leave and get the worst ending. There's a couple reasons for this. Number one is your party will be kind of blindsided by it if you haven't roleplayed really, really well in the Netherdeep and let them know that he's in a bad headspace. The other thing is the book doesn't give you a lot of information on what to do afterwards. So it basically says, here's what happens. He goes and destroys the entire city, and he can go destroy more. Have fun with it. If you're okay with that and want to figure things out on your own and you think it'd be interesting, I say go for it, have at it. That's not something that I was interested in. So instead I had them fight him, and then at the end of phase 3, I was going to have them, whether they defeated him or they convinced him to be redeemed, I was going to have him ask then, and they were able to let him go at that point. There's an argument maybe that's a little bit railroady, but my party still had a choice whether to just kill him or to redeem him, and I feel like that played out better than having the worst ending. Another important thing is to understand all the mechanics in the fight itself. So there are layer actions, there's legendary resistances, there's legendary actions, and they're different depending on what phase of the fight you're in. So have a good understanding of each phase and what Alexian's motivations are and what his options are before you go into the fight. Once it's all said and done, the last piece of advice I have for this is have your players tell you what their characters do after the adventure. I feel like this is a lot of fun for players. They get to think a little bit creatively, and it gives a really good ending and wrap up to the adventure itself. Hopefully you've been able to find something that's useful. Overall, I really enjoyed this adventure. I ran it mostly as is out of the book with a few tweaks here and there to try and bring my party in a little bit and play to their backstories a little bit. I would highly recommend this as an adventure. There are others that I have ran that are official that I would not probably recommend, but this one I think is very good. It's fun, it's a different setting, but I highly recommend it. I would probably play this one again, which I think is the sign of a good adventure. That is pretty much it. Thank you guys a ton for watching. I do appreciate it. Huge shout out to my patrons. We'll catch you all in the next adventure.